The cafe hummed with the sound of clinking cups and quiet conversations, a little pocket of calm on an otherwise rainy Tuesday morning. Through the large glass windows, droplets streaked down steadily, blurring the world outside into soft watercolor shapes. Inside, a man named Jason sat near the window with a laptop open, half watching the rain, half working on the spreadsheet glowing on his screen. He wore a navy sweater, jeans, and the kind of thoughtful expression that suggested a mind, always half a step ahead of the present. Across the counter, a young woman stepped up to order. Her voice was soft but confident, and she had the look of someone who wasn't new to hard work. A green blouse tucked into smart slacks, her brown hair loosely tied back, reins still catching at the ends. "Just a cappuccino, please," she said with a tired smile. When the barista announced the price, she opened her wallet, paused, and frowned. Her card was missing. She checked again, still no card. She patted her pockets, her bag, even glanced down in case it had fallen. But it was clear. "I must have left it at home," she said, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I'll just cancel." Jason stood up before she could finish. "Add it to mine," he said casually, handing over a $5 bill. "No big deal." She turned to him in surprise. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," he said with a grin. "You look like you need the coffee more than I do today." She laughed a little and accepted the cup when it came. "Thank you," she said, eyes meeting his for a brief, curious moment. "I'll pay you back." "Don't worry about it." Jason shrugged. "Just pass it on someday." She smiled, a real one this time, not just polite. "Well then, thank you, Jason. I'm Elle." She moved to the other end of the cafe, sitting near the door. Jason returned to his spot by the window, not thinking too much of the encounter. Just a moment, a gesture. He didn't know that Elle had just come from a job interview, one she wasn't even sure she wanted anymore. She didn't know that the man who had paid for her drink was the very person she'd be meeting again tomorrow, but on very different terms. The next day, Elle walked through the wide, marble-floored lobby of Hawthorne & Co. Her heels echoed against the polished surface as she checked in at the front desk. She was nervous, but not the type that made her frizz more, like the kind that pushed her forward, made her sharper. She had researched the firm all night. They were launching a new community initiative and expanding operations into 3 cities. She was applying for a leadership role in one of those regional teams. It was the kind of position that required more than just skill, it demanded vision. She was led to the 14th floor, into a sleek boardroom with warm lighting and a wall of glass that overlooked the city skyline. The assistant offered her a bottle of water and a soft smile before leaving her alone. She didn't have to wait long. The door opened and in stepped the man from the cafe, Jason. Same sharp eyes, same calm energy, this time in a charcoal suit. For a second, neither of them spoke. Elle blinked. Jason's brows lifted, amused. "Well," he said finally, "this is unexpected." "You're the CEO?" she asked, trying to hide her shock. "I am," he smiled, pulling out the chair across from her. "And you're the one who tipped me $5 yesterday with a smile I didn't forget." Elle let out a breath. "I would have dressed differently if I'd known," he laughed. "Honestly, you wore confidence better than most suits." Their interview began like any other, structured and professional, but something subtle lingered between them. A shared curiosity, a kind of respect that wasn't born from credentials or titles, but from the way each had handled a moment of kindness without knowing its weight. Jason listened closely to her ideas. the way she framed leadership as a conversation. Instead of a command, how she focused on people before profit. He found himself leaning forward more than usual, intrigued, and Elle, though nervous at first, noticed how Jason didn't dominate the conversation. He asked thoughtful questions. He let silence settle naturally. And beneath the title and the suit, she saw the same person who had stepped in with $5 and a simple, human gesture. When the interview ended, Jason stood and offered his hand. "Thank you, Elle. That was refreshing." She shook it, smiling. "Thanks for the coffee again. Any time." She left the office with a strange feeling, like she hadn't just been evaluated, but understood. And Jason sat down at his desk, her resume still in hand, already knowing he was going to circle her name. But he didn't just remember her as the woman from yesterday. He remembered how she looked at the world not with entitlement, but with effort. And that was rare. What neither of them realized then was that something had already begun. A simple kindness, a shared moment, a spark, and sometimes that's all it takes. Jason sat at his desk long after Elle had left the building, her resume still open in front of him. The rain had returned, tapping against the glass wall behind him in quiet rhythm. He leaned back in his chair, fingers lightly drumming the edge. Of her application, her credentials were solid. Good university, consistent experience, impressive community engagement. But it wasn't the words on the page that held his attention. It was the way she had walked into the interview without knowing who he was, without trying to impress anyone, and yet impressed him all the same. That kind of honesty wasn't common in his world. Across the page, he had scribbled one word: potential. Later that evening, Jason sat in a quiet meeting with his HR lead and 2 senior department heads. They were reviewing the final short for the regional leadership positions. Elle's name wasn't on it yet. "Anyone missing?" Jason asked, casually flipping through the printed names. "I think we've got a strong group," his HR lead replied. "We removed 2 candidates with less formal leadership experience." Jason raised an eyebrow. "Elle Marlowe, yes. She's got solid instincts, but not much top-level experience. We thought she might be better suited for an associate role." Jason looked up, his tone still even. "Let's put her back in the running. Full consideration." A pause. The department head frowned. "Any reason in particular?" Jason smiled faintly. "She has something the others don't. She listens like she's already part of the team." No one pushed further. They knew Jason rarely interfered directly in hiring decisions, unless he had a very good reason. They added Elle's name back onto the review list. Meanwhile, Elle was curled up on her apartment sofa with a blanket and a cup of herbal tea, her thoughts circling the day like leaves in wind. The moment she had seen Jason in that boardroom, something had clicked. Not nerves, something deeper. Recognition, not just of a face, but of a moment that mattered. She thought of how he had spoken to her, not as a superior, but as an equal. How he had actually listened. Most interviews felt like performances. This one had felt like a conversation. She checked her inbox again. No word yet. The next morning, Elle opened her email to find a message titled, "Second round interview. Executive review." Her breath caught. She clicked it open, her eyes scanning fast. It wasn't a group interview. It was a one-on-one follow-up. With Jason, she reread the email twice before smiling. Something about it felt different, not just like a second chance, but like the beginning of something else. When she arrived at the office 2 days later, it wasn't nerves she carried. It was purpose, confidence, not from arrogance, but from being seen. Jason greeted her in the smaller conference room with 2 coffees in hand, 1 oat milk cappuccino, 1 black, just like the first time. "I figured I owed you this time," he said, handing her the drink. Elle smiled, touched by the detail. "You remembered. I remember small things," he said lightly. "They're usually the important ones." They sat down again, but this time the air was different. Less formal, more open. Jason didn't pull out a clipboard. He didn't ask technical questions. Instead, he said, "Tell me what matters to you, Elle. Not on paper, for real." She blinked, then leaned in slightly. "People," she said after a moment. "Trust. Making sure the people I work with don't feel like numbers." He nodded. "What would your first move be if we gave you a team?" "Listen to them," she said simply. "I'd want to know what they need before I try to lead them." Jason studied her, something quiet flickering in his gaze. It wasn't just admiration, it was recognition. He had said those same words once, early in his own leadership journey. They talked for another hour, the conversation drifting between work, philosophy, life stories, even the books they read on long train rides. Somewhere in the middle, the conversation stopped feeling like an interview at all. When the meeting ended, Jason walked her to the elevator. "I'll be honest," he said, hands in his pockets. "You weren't on the original shortlist, but you're on mine now." Elle turned to him, a soft smile playing on her lips. "Why?" "Because you made me rethink what the shortlist should look like." The elevator doors opened, and she stepped inside. "I'll wait for your call," she said with a small wave. He watched her go, then turned back to the hallway, the coffee cup still warm in his hand. He didn't know exactly when the line between interest and admiration had blurred, but it had, and that tip she left him, $5 and a smile, wasn't just the start of a story. It was the spark of something neither of them had expected. 2 days passed. Elle kept busy with freelance projects and volunteer work at the youth center, but her thoughts drifted more often than she liked to that room. That smile, and the way Jason had looked at her after the second interview. It wasn't romantic, not yet, but there was something unspoken in the space between them. Something real. When her phone rang on a quiet Thursday morning, her heart jumped. It was an unfamiliar number, but she knew. She took a steadying breath and answered. "Elle Marlowe." "Yes, this is Marcia from Hawthorne & Co. I'm pleased to let you know that we're offering you the regional leadership position in our Chicago expansion team. The official letter will follow by email." Elle blinked, stunned silent. "I thank you," she finally managed. "Really, thank you." "We were impressed," Marcia said warmly. "Jason asked me to let you know. Personally, he said you'd understand why." Elle smiled, the words hanging in her ear like a melody. He remembered he had listened. She spent the rest of the day floating between joy and disbelief. She hadn't just gotten a job, she had been chosen. Not for her perfect answers, but for who she was. That evening, Jason sat alone in his office. The city stretched wide beyond the tall windows. He had just wrapped up back-to-back meetings, but his mind wasn't on budgets or projections. It was on Elle. He had reviewed her file again. Everything made sense. But what stuck with him more than her qualifications was her presence. Grounded, thoughtful, unafraid to admit what she didn't know. He thought about the others they'd hired over the years, some polished, some brilliant, but few with that quiet kind of courage. He admired that, maybe because, in some ways, he'd lost it himself for a while. Later that night, he stopped by the same cafe. The barista recognized him, back for another hero moment. The young man joked. Jason chuckled. Just coffee this time. But as he stood waiting, he remembered her face when she'd offered him that tip. Not as a favor, but as an equal gesture, a thank you between strangers. That weekend, the Chicago team flew in for orientation. Elle arrived early, dressed professionally but comfortably, hair pulled back and eyes sharp with focus. Jason met her in the conference lounge before the others arrived. "Morning," he said, handing her a coffee, oat milk. "Again, you're going to spoil me," she teased. "Just keeping traditions," he said with a smile. They sat for a few moments in silence. The air held a quiet energy between them, not tense, not awkward, but full of things neither had said yet. "You know," Elle said slowly, "I still can't believe you remembered me." "I didn't just remember," Jason said, leaning forward. "I noticed." He let the words sit, then changed the subject before either of them got too close to something they couldn't take back, not yet. Over the next few weeks, Elle settled into her new role with quiet strength. Her team responded quickly to her. Leadership not because she pushed hard, but because she listened. She saw them. And in a world of bullet points and KPIs that mattered, Jason watched from a distance. He didn't interfere, didn't play favorites, but every so often he'd check in on her reports or stop by her meetings. Not officially, just curious. The first time she presented a new client strategy, the boardroom was full of skeptical eyes. Elle stood calmly, voice steady, walking them through each detail. Her points were clear, grounded in data, but guided by a story, a human story. When she finished, there was a pause. Then one of the senior partners nodded slowly. "You lead like someone who's already failed once," he said. Elle didn't flinch. "I've failed more than once, but never the same way twice." Jason smiled. Later, as they left the boardroom, he caught up beside her. "You were brilliant in there." She looked at him, half smiling. "Still think I need more experience." He grinned. "I think you're rewriting the definition." They walked quietly down the hallway. Their shoulders didn't touch, their hands didn't brush, but something between them had already begun to shift. A gentle gravity, a quiet orbit. It wasn't about a tip anymore, or a job, or a moment in line at a cafe. It was about seeing each other, and being seen, not for what they had on paper, but for everything else that mattered more. The weeks rolled by with a rhythm that felt natural, too natural, maybe. Elle woke each morning with purpose, her team growing stronger beneath her quiet leadership. She moved through the office like she belonged, not because of authority, but because of connection. Her voice was becoming one others sought out, not loud, but steady, thoughtful, clear. Jason watched all of it unfold from a comfortable distance. He'd stop by her floor occasionally, offering a piece of advice, sharing insight, or sometimes just standing by the whiteboard during team reviews, letting her take the lead. But whenever he passed her desk, there was always a pause in him, like something inside pulled slightly toward her before he gently moved on. Elle noticed. Of course, she noticed. They hadn't talked about the coffee shop again, or the interview, or the offer letter. But those things lived quietly between them, like bookmarks in a story still unfolding. One Friday evening, as the office began to empty out, Elle was still at her desk, finishing up a report. The soft click of her keyboard echoed in the otherwise silent room. When she finally looked up, Jason was standing near the glass divider, a to-go coffee tray in hand. "You look like you need one," he said. Holding it up, she chuckled, rubbing her eyes. I probably look like I need sleep more. Well, this one's decaf, he said with a grin, handing her the cup. She took it, surprised. You remembered. Jason leaned against the edge of her desk. You've been carrying the whole floor lately. Thought someone should carry a cup for you. She smiled into her sip, warmth blooming in her chest. They didn't speak for a while. The city below them glowed with the soft amber of streetlights, the kind of light that made everything look like it had meaning. Then Elle said, You know, what I still think about sometimes. Jason tilted his head. What, if you hadn't been behind me that day at the cafe? If I hadn't left that tip? He didn't answer right away, just watched her, thoughtful. I think, he said slowly, we would have met anyway. Somewhere, somehow. Why? Because people who are meant to see each other, he said, find a way to look up at the same time. Her gaze dropped to her cup, the moment held. I don't usually feel seen, she whispered. Jason leaned forward just slightly. You are. She looked up, and there it was, again that pull. The air between them full of all the things they hadn't said, and all the things they didn't need to. He stood up then, as if breaking the spell gently. You've got a weekend ahead. Go rest. The world can wait till Monday. Elle nodded, watching him walk away. But something inside her knew they'd just crossed a line, quiet and invisible, but real. The space between them wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with trust, with curiosity, with something that shimmered just beneath the surface. The next day, Jason took the long way through the city, walking without a destination. He found himself near the park by the river, the place he used to go when things felt heavy. There was a bench there, shaded by an old elm, and for the first time in a long while, he sat and just let himself feel it. He had built so much of his life on decisions and planning, but this self felt like something that unfolded on its own. Not strategy, not timing, just ... Connection. He thought about her laugh, the way she looked when she forgot to be composed, the way she cared about people without ever trying to prove it. She wasn't just someone he'd hired, she was becoming someone he needed near him. Back at her apartment, Elle sat by the window with a book in her lap, but her eyes weren't on the pages. They were on the coffee cup sitting beside her, now empty but still warm to the touch. She remembered how his fingers had brushed hers when he handed it over, how his voice had softened when he said she was seen, not just heard. Seen. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was something more than admiration, a slow unfolding, a story not written with fireworks, but with small human moments that mattered more. And somewhere in the quiet spaces between their lives, something had begun to bloom, not loud but deep and true. The office hummed on Monday morning with the usual soft chatter and the tap of keys. But for Elle, the day started differently. She found a sticky note on her monitor that simply read, "Check the conference room to 9 a.m. There was no signature, but she knew. At precisely 9, she stepped into the smaller, glass-walled room on the west side of the floor. The sunlight flooded the space, and on the center table sat a single white paper bag with 2 pastries and a fresh cup of coffee oat. Milk again. Jason was already there, jacket off, sleeves rolled, seated with his tablet. He looked up and smiled like it was just another normal meeting. Elle raised a brow. Bribery now, encouragement, he replied, gesturing to the seat across from him. You've had 3 wins in 3 weeks. Thought you earned a calm moment. She sat down slowly, grateful but cautious. Is this a pattern I should get used to? I hope so. They ate quietly for a while. No pressure, no agenda. Just two people who didn't need to fill the space between them with noise. Jason finally spoke. "You know, the first few years I was CEO, I thought leadership meant keeping distance, staying above the mess. Only later did I realize people don't need you to be above them. They need you beside them." Elle looked at him, eyes soft. "And who was beside you?" He hesitated for the first time, then shrugged lightly. "No one for a while. You don't realize how lonely it gets until silence starts feeling safer than conversation." Elle studied him. He always carried himself with quiet strength, like someone who had rebuilt from pieces. Now she saw the lines beneath that calm, the scars he didn't hide, but didn't show either. "Silence doesn't mean you're alone," she said gently. "Sometimes it just means you're listening." He looked at her, a little surprised by how well she understood. And in that quiet room, something shifted between them again. They finished their coffee. No grand declarations, no lingering touches, just the kind of silence that didn't need to be filled. Later that afternoon, Elle stayed late, finishing final drafts for a proposal. Most of the office had emptied. She stood by the window, stretching, when she noticed Jason's light still on across the floor. On instinct, she walked over, carrying a fresh coffee she had grabbed from the machine. "Thought I'd return the favor," she said, holding it out. Jason looked up, tired but smiling. "Now we're even." She sat on the corner of his desk without invitation, something they had never done before. It didn't feel strange. It felt like it had been waiting. "You're quiet today," she said. "Just thinking about." He hesitated, then looked at her. "About timing, and the way we wait for perfect moments that never come." Elle said nothing. She just waited. Jason continued, voice soft. "What if we stop waiting?" She set her coffee down and folded her hands in her lap. "Are we still talking about work?" He smiled, a quiet acknowledgement. "Not entirely." She didn't rush an answer. Instead, she let the moment breathe. "Jason, you're my boss. I know. There are lines." "There are," he agreed, "but there's also truth." Silence again, but this time it wasn't uncertain. It was patient, full. "I'm not asking for a decision," he added. "I just wanted to be honest." Elle stood slowly, walked to the door, then turned back, one hand on the frame. "I'm not walking away," she said. Jason met her eyes. "I know." She smiled gently. "Just not walking forward yet, either. Fair." And with that, she left, leaving the door open behind her. Jason sat back, heart heavier, but not in a painful way. It was the kind of weight that came from carrying something real back in her apartment that night. Elle stood on the balcony, letting the night breeze sweep through her hair. She held her phone in one hand, reading the message he had sent just moments ago. "No matter what this becomes, thank you for reminding me how silence can speak louder than ambition." She didn't reply. Not yet. She just held the phone to her chest and closed her eyes, breathing it all in. It wasn't a love story yet, but it was a story. One written in gestures, in pauses, in silence that didn't feel empty, but full of things worth waiting for. The next few days settled into something quiet but charged. Elle and Jason passed each other in meetings, exchanged brief nods in hallways, and shared the occasional smile in passing. But their conversations, once easy and free-flowing, had grown, measured, careful in a way neither of them entirely liked. Still, beneath that quietness, something had changed. Everyone in the office could feel it. The glances, the silences, the way Jason's tone softened slightly when he asked for Elle's input in meetings, the way she always seemed to be one step ahead of what he needed. It wasn't favoritism. It wasn't flirtation. It was something deeper, unnamed, balanced, real. One Thursday evening, the office cleared early after a successful project launch. Elle stayed behind to clean up the conference room. Jason walked in as she was collecting papers, sleeves rolled up, hair pinned loosely behind her head. "Didn't think anyone else was still here," she said, not looking up. "I could say the same to you," he replied, grabbing a stray folder from the floor. "But then again, we always seem to stay late on the same nights." She paused, then smiled. "Maybe we just like the quiet." Jason watched her. "Or maybe we like the same things." That made her stop. She turned slowly, meeting his gaze. "I've been thinking," he said, stepping a little closer, "about what you said about lines." Elle leaned back against the table, crossing her arms gently. "And I don't want to cross them, not carelessly. But I also don't want to pretend there's nothing here." She nodded slowly. "There is something here." They stood like that for a while, a kind of shared stillness that said more than either of them could. The city buzzed beyond the windows, lights flickering like distant stars. But inside that room, time moved slower. "I'm not afraid of what this could be," Jason said finally. "I'm just trying to respect the pace you need." Elle looked down, brushing her thumb against the edge of the table. "I appreciate that," she said softly. "It's not that I don't feel it too. I do. But I've worked too hard to be seen for what I can do. I don't want anything to blur that." Jason nodded. "And I don't want to be the reason it does." She glanced up at him, eyes warm. "Then maybe we walk carefully. Together, no labels. No pressure, just keep seeing each other." "Yes," she said. "That," he smiled. Not the confident, polished one he gave in press photos, but the quiet one she'd first seen at the cafe. The one that had made her stop and look. Twice later that night, Elle sat in her apartment, staring at the ceiling. Her phone buzzed beside her. It was Jason again. "Jason, you once said you didn't usually feel seen. I just wanted to say, I see you, every day." She stared at the message for a long time before replying, "L, and I see you." Not just the title, not the calm leader. The person underneath. He didn't write back. He didn't need to. The next morning, the office felt different. Jason arrived early, as always, but this time he didn't walk straight to his desk. Instead, he paused by Elle's cubicle and set a coffee down without saying a word. Oat milk, of course. When Elle arrived, she spotted it right away. She looked around, half expecting him to appear. But he was gone, just the coffee. Just the note beneath it. "You're doing great. Don't let the noise drown that out." She sat down slowly, heart lighter than it had been in weeks. Later that day, they passed in the hallway. Their eyes met. They didn't stop. They didn't speak. But they smiled. And sometimes, that's all it takes. What they didn't say out loud, what hung in the air between their words, was starting to mean more than the things they had already said. It wasn't fast, it wasn't loud, but it was honest, and it was theirs. It was a quiet Sunday morning, the kind that slowed the world down to a breath. The city outside stirred gently, soft traffic, the rustle of early walkers, the occasional bark from a dog out for its routine. Inside the cafe where it had all begun, the barista wiped down the counter while jazz played low from the speakers. The door chimed softly as Elle stepped inside, wearing a light coat and a scarf that trailed behind her with the breeze. She hadn't planned to be here this morning, but something had pulled her in, like memory guiding her feet. She ordered her drink, smiled politely, and stepped toward the same seat near the window where she had once found herself fumbling for a card that wasn't there. The table was empty, the wood worn and familiar. She took a seat. A moment later, the door chimed. Again, Jason. His hair was a little messier than usual, like he'd woken up without checking the mirror. His coat was unbuttoned, but his eyes lit up the second they found her. "You always beat me here," he said, approaching with that quiet grin that still made her heart stir. "I didn't know I was racing you," she replied, smirking. "Didn't either," he said, sitting across from her. For a moment, they just looked at each other. The last few weeks had been full of things unsaid and things gently unfolding. Late nights of quiet conversation, shared glances in meetings, an easy rhythm that felt more like music than routine. They hadn't labeled it, hadn't rushed it, but it had grown into something unmistakable. Jason reached into his coat pocket and placed a small envelope on the table. Elle raised an eyebrow. "A letter, something like that," he said. "Open it." Inside was a coffee shop gift card. On it, written in careful penmanship, "For the next time your card is accidentally declined." Elle laughed, that easy, real kind of laugh that made her eyes shine. "You're never going to let me forget that day, are you?" "Never," he said, "because it was the best $5 I ever spent." She looked at him, now not just the CEO, not just the man who had handed her a latte, but someone who had changed her life in the quietest, kindest ways. And she realized she didn't want to go another day without telling him that. "I don't know when it happened," she said softly, hands wrapped around her cup. "But somewhere between job offers and long nights and quiet moments like this, I started looking forward to seeing you more than I ever expected." Jason's gaze held steady, and I started waking up hoping I'd get to see you smile. Silence stretched again, but it didn't hang. It settled, soft and full. "I'm not afraid anymore," she whispered. "Me neither." They sat in that golden pocket of morning light for a while longer. No plans, no rush. Just two people who had found something rare. Before they left, Jason stood and held her coat as she slipped it on. As they walked out together, the barista called out, "You two should come here more often. You make it feel like a movie." Elle smiled. "Maybe it is." Outside, the breeze danced through the streets, the sky just starting to clear. Jason reached for her hand, not hesitantly, not boldly, but like someone reaching for home. She took it. They walked, not knowing exactly where they were going, but knowing they'd go there together. And as they turned the corner, Elle glanced at him and said, "You still owe me one more coffee." Jason laughed. "Then let's make it a lifetime supply." The city kept moving around them, indifferent to the moment but for them. It was everything. The beginning of a story that didn't need grand gestures, just small ones, made over and over again, together.